start by talking a little bit about innovation because the other day we were actually having a bit of a look back at the single customer view for us, and one of the things that we noted was that this week, 5 years ago, Bench was born. So we launched the company, and really the key driver for us was specifically around innovation and how to do things differently. So as I was going through this conversation, we were trying to think about all of the products that we use now that we may not use tomorrow, which is a lot of what innovation does. It sort of makes products obsolete as new ones come about. So one of the ones that we mentioned was the USB. Today was an event, we require the USB, but we found that most people feel that at some point in their life, the USB will become extinct. Cloud storage will probably make that obsolete. The next one was the remote control. So, who here thinks that maybe the remote control will eventually die in their lifetime? Yep, so kind of the rationale there was that the Internet of Things will eventually wipe out the remote control. And then the conversation got a little bit bigger. So we started to think about the way that we buy things and, naturally how we use cash. Maybe a show of hands actually, who here in their week would spend more of their transactions on some kind of internet or plastic method rather than cash already? Nearly everybody is using Opal or NetBank or PayPass, and it's basically disappearing the cash economy. So we found that most people feel that cash will eventually die. It may still exist. There were some arguments that it would still exist, but more for those traditional types that like to just feel the feel of money, or potentially drug dealers and criminals. They'll probably keep using it. So it got us moving to one of the innovations that we're seeing in marketing, which is specifically around the advertising rate card. And that's been the way that we've bought advertising, since the start. And the biggest innovation that's kind of taken that over is programmatic advertising. That is not a thing. It's not like a channel like social or display. It's actually a methodology for buying. And realistically, if you look at the two ways that we can buy now, those are the two. Advertising rate cards may still exist in some capacity, but I believe generally just for the traditional types and maybe criminals, as well. Bit of a stab there. But I wanted to basically look at one of the trends that I'm seeing at the moment in programmatic, and that's that a lot of brands tend to be highlighting that they're taking their programmatic advertising in-house. So we saw a few years ago Foxtel starting to do that, and having a few trials and errors at that over the last little while. Pernod Ricard signing a deal with an in-house programmatic platform, Procter & Gamble taking their programmatic in-house, Netflix and so on. So the trend is there, and I wanted to understand how effective it is by looking back at the last 5 years for us, seeing what maybe we've learnt from it, what are some of the big challenges, and how brands can do it with their eyes open. So first, actually, I'll go with Anton's methodology of shapes, because I also think that that's a simple way to look at things. And basically what I did was I drew up a matrix of how to assess the level of in-house programmatic each brand has by two vectors. So the first one, I look at how many employees inside of your company operate programmatic technology. And then the second one is how many contracts or decisions with tech data and inventory do you specifically own, not through a proxy. And so if we look at the top right quadrant, that would define us as 100% in-house. And in our experience, nobody is truly there yet. So it's important to know the extreme, but then it's important for us to kind of peg where we sit on that matrix. So really, I think there's three personas that different brands sit in at the moment. The first one is those that are looking to hire more talent internally or upskill their existing talent. So we'll call them the headhunters. The second one is those that are looking to make more direct contracts or sign more direct deals and whatnot. We'll call them the contract crusaders. And then the third one is those that are trying to do both. Basically own everything, it's all mine. So we'll call them the all miners. Cool. So now that we know the three types, each of us probably sits somewhere along that spectrum. And the trend is moving that way. So what I did actually is a couple of days ago, I decided instead of going through the nitty-gritty of methodologies for doing this, I thought it'd be more meaningful to actually uncover some of the 7 deadly sins of taking programmatic in-house. So about a year and a half ago, we did the 7 deadly sins that mainly held to account agencies in the landscape. But now that we're seeing brands working directly with vendors and technology, I thought, why not hold them to account now? So I'm going to try to lift the veil a little bit and uncover some of the 7 deadly sins of taking programmatic in-house. So the first entity that I want to explore is, we've probably, maybe a show of hands, who here knows what a demand-side platform is? Cool, so nearly everybody. Basically, it's a piece of technology, works on behalf of the advertiser to buy inventory programmatically using various algorithms and real-time bidding. Now, the biggest sin that I'm finding when I speak to brands who are sitting down with demand-side platforms is that within the first 30 seconds, they feel like the conversation is exactly like the other 10 that they just spoke to. So DSPs are desperately trying to differentiate, but what's happened is that they've become a commodity. So for brands, one of the biggest things that they'll struggle with is finding out what's truly important beyond the narrative. So I've found actually there's an easy way to call out DSPs for their real point of difference versus the buzzwords. And I looked at this graph by Gartner. Has anyone ever seen this type of graph of the peak of inflated expectations? Okay, so this is a really good cheat sheet for finding out what is the buzz and the hype. So the hype of the peak of inflated expectations usually showcases things that are trending at the moment. So at the moment, the big thing is cross-device identification. So if you speak to any of the tech vendors, they'll tell you about their unique word for cross-device. There's other things here like multi-dimensional campaign segmentation. You know, that'll get a contract signed. So those are this is a really good kind of cheat sheet to figure out, all the stuff that's happening. But one of the things that we really wanted to focus on was how to make a platform that can manage multiple DSPs at one time and assess them on the 1 or 2 metrics that truly matter. So, we thought, okay, well, if you're going to manage multiple partners, which is really the key to optimization, manage multiple creative, you'll find the best creative. You manage multiple partners, you'll find the best partners. So the way that we did that was that we boiled it down to 2 metrics that really you need to hold a vendor to account to. And those are goal achievement and extraction. How much we meet, exceed or under meet the goal, and whether we spend the budget. And those are really the only 2 things that matter. And you'll find a lot of technologies at the moment are creating kind of fancy words around it. Some call it delivery. We spoke to another vendor that calls it, they've got a thing called cruise control, where you just click a button and then it says it's going to help you meet those objectives. So effectively, they're the only 2. And when it boils down to those 2, it becomes a lot simpler. Second deadly sin. At the moment, vendors are all execution and no strategy. And I believe that this is one of the legacy frameworks that came out when DSP started to launch, because what happened was that they wanted to tick the box of reach. Basically, at the click of a button, you can access every audience everywhere, and that was their main remit. But what we're finding at the moment is that marketers much more care about performance. And with performance, you need an overarching strategy. So when I say that there's no strategy, basically I'm talking about the idea that brands are met with this massive challenge to somehow merge a marketing brief into a targeting parameters framework of a platform. And they're meant to sort of know what each entity should be interpreted in terms of, how to target a specific audience or how to meet a particular goal. It's all basically up to them. So what happens is that when a optimizer, somebody that's working on the platform, dives in there and they've somehow figured out how to interpret a brief into a platform, they get better at it. And when they leave the company, so too does their knowledge and the ability to actually do that matching. So if you don't know how to optimize based on a brief and turn that into a platform and make them speak the same language, you basically end up in a shitstorm. So what we've basically done is taken that shitstorm, looked at the shape that it makes, and tried to overlay a methodology for creating strategy in programmatic. And the shape that we found was a triangle. So most people have seen this. It's kind of like the Marketing 101 framework. It's effectively the purchase funnel. And what we found is that no matter what the brief or the complexity of the strategy, there'll be elements of a campaign that fit into one of these 5 objectives. And when you've identified these 5 objectives, you can actually mirror up the metric to hold accountable to those specific objectives. And each specific area of the funnel can be measured against that and assess performance, the goal achievement extraction piece that I spoke about. So we wanted to embed it in technology and analytics, and I believe in whatever analytics framework you use, understanding the purchase funnel, understanding where they start and where they finish in a simple way is the methodology to do that. You start to track things, you start to see a really interesting single customer view of what you want to achieve. The third deadly sin. Okay, so if you don't have an in-house team, what DSPs tend to do at the moment is they offer a managed service. But one of the things to be aware of is to not confuse a managed service with a managed sales team. Are they managing your account or are they managing you? So basically, what we've defined as a structure for your in-house team is that if you were to bring everything in-house, there would really be 3 main types of roles that you would be looking for. So we've defined it as the strategist, the optimizer, and the techie. Okay, and depending on your size of team and budget and how willing you are to kind of do this, it doesn't actually matter, because it's important, even if you don't hire these people, that you understand the team that's actually managing your campaigns and strategy. Now, in our view, the number 1 priority should be to take strategy in-house. You really need to own the overarching ability to analyze trends and see what's working and what's not. The next cab off the rank after that would be the optimizer, somebody that's working within the platforms and managing the campaign from a day-to-day level. And then the third, for more complex setups, is that techie, the person that's working within the pixeling framework with your tag management and all of that. I'll share these slides, but it's good to see everybody writing in the idea management platform. It's a methodology that we've kind of seen as, it's important to see where you want to get to, but I believe it's more important to figure out what the next step is along that journey. So that's kind of a framework there. It's a strategy where if you don't know how a brief is merging into a platform, you're effectively leaving all of your marketing up to the optimizer, and that can be really dangerous because it makes this disconnect, and it's very hard to bring on the non-digital people in the team to the strategy because they have to just assume that, things are being done the right way. So they're never really owning, this space. Cool. Number 4, I'm going to call out actually the recruiters this time, because as we know, programmatic is a massive buzzword at the moment. And when an industry is bubbling up when the recruiters flock to it. So there's a tendency at the moment for recruiters to actually oversell candidates. And the problem at the moment is that there is it would seem like the talent pools are full, but when you look under the hood, the talent pools are very, very dry. So it means that you just need to be aware when you're looking for talent to apply the principles of testing what you want to get from those different operators. And also to know that salaries are very inflated as a result as well. I think there was a survey done last year from the Institute of Analytics that found that the average data scientist working within like social media frameworks is paid something like $190,000 a year. So, important to know that within that bubble, if you can say on your CV that you know maths and marketing, there's at least a 30% buffer there. So a little pro tip for maybe those looking for a new job. Awesome. Now, the next one is I wanted to tackle and go after the internet giants because marketing is becoming a very dangerous landscape where you've got this duopoly of power players, which is obviously Google and Facebook. So combined, those two are valued at almost $1 trillion. So it's an interesting landscape because for the first time ever, you've got entities that have a vested interest in you spending more on their platform, but they're also leading the way in analytics or marking their own homework. So what we've actually seen recently is a massive trend where a lot of advertisers are having usually double-click, whisper in their ear about really great words like unify and simplify and all-in-one. And so as brands, we need to kind of be a bit conscious of this power play. Facebook's doing it as well, but in a different way. They don't share their audiences anywhere but on their platform, so the only way to access it is through Facebook. DoubleClick just basically want you to sit under their entire ecosystem and tech stack. So more important than ever, it's for advertisers to think about how to manage those from an agnostic and unbiased perspective. It would be similar to a duopoly like say if in the grocery segment, we've got Coles and Woolies. And say if Coles wanted to lock you in the sense that you could buy from Woolies, but you could only buy the products that you could see between 3 aisles of Coles products. So if you can see it, you can buy it, but there's this big film of Coles sort of locking you in. So really be aware of that. The other thing that we've seen with the internet giants is that marketing is starting to build walls, the best walls. Okay, so it basically means that they're not sharing their data with each other. And that can be a really dangerous space when you want to create a single customer view. The other dangers are, fake news, spying and bots and ad fraud. The landscape's becoming a really kind of scary place, and for the first time ever, advertisers really need to start to demand control to be on their side from an analytics standpoint and from a media buying standpoint. Okay, attack DSPs. Now it's time for data management platforms. So sit up, guys. This is where you got to defend yourselves. So I would argue that the rhetoric around how data is the most important thing to own is actually false. The most important thing is to use data effectively, but not necessarily to own it. So a lot of data management platforms are effectively creating this oasis of warehouses, these massive storage facilities for data that was never stored that way before. And the danger of doing that is that you can ink a new deal with a DMP and it can be a huge, long, robust and expensive process and not really actually get anything from it. We firmly believe that there is a massive amount of really important data to get from your first-party audiences. But what's sometimes much more important, and definitely more important to do first, is to segment and activate that audience as opposed to just warehouse and store it and own it, build up these walls. So one of the findings that came out when we started digging into audiences a couple of years ago was that from a marketing brief standpoint, we're taught to really clearly understand who our audience group is. But from a digital standpoint, there's usually dozens or hundreds or thousands of different strategies to reach them now. So a pro tip, a first cab off the ranks in terms of segmentation, is to look at things from an audience group and an audience strategies framework. So, an example, for instance, is that we work quite heavily in the insurance space, where we had a client in car insurance that was quite certain about their product being male skewed, and the targeting should follow suit. They basically dug into their CRM, they knew their data, and they told us that. So what we did was kept an experiential element of the campaign up to learn how users are engaging. And the data showed that whilst the male audiences were quite heavily involved in the influencing and early stages of engagement of different content, it was usually female skewed markets that were actually making the decision. Now, if we look, for instance, at a group like targeting parents, there's many, many different ways to find those audiences based on age and gender and location and interests and so on. It's actually more important for a brand to figure out what's the perfect recipe for finding an audience than who that audience is. No longer do we have to rely on the publisher to tell us that that's their audience. There's many ways to cook it and cut it. So it's a model to look at, and I believe the first one before taking a DMP on Inhouse. Okay, the last one. So I believe there's a condition which we as a community, but in particular journalists, are suffering, which is a condition of premature evaluation. So what do I mean by this? A lot of the media headlines are about brands that sign a new deal. So I don't know if anybody's ever seen recently the latest kind of digital marketing troll, Mark Ritson. Has anyone kind of been hearing some of the stuff that's been said from him? Yeah, so I actually read an article which I did agree with of his. I won't tell him, but the article was about brands should focus more on the profitability of the company over the purpose inbuilt in their advertising. And I think as a community, we should start owning the outcomes that we're driving from a bottom line perspective for a business rather than just signing a new shiny toy. Those seem to be getting the headlines from Ad News and Mumbrella. But if we heard more case studies about CMOs and how they implemented things and what that actually did for a company from a growth in revenue or customers standpoint, I think it would be much more beneficial than telling the world that we've just signed a new Adobe stack, or we've just signed a new deal with Turn or whatever. And so that's 7 sins there. I'll end with a bonus one because it would be wrong not to mention this word, which is transparency. So I used this image because the way to test the fat content in food has been to look at the transparency of the paper. So I thought an interesting way to look at the way to test the transparency of vendors in media is to look at the fat content of their offering. And what I mean by that is that if we assess transparency based on the ratio of fat to meat, or based on the amount you pay versus what you get, we'll start to look at things very differently. Because if we look at any vendor along the whole landscape, nobody is fully transparent. At best, translucent. So, you know, it's a paradigm shift where we're starting to become, you know, bean counters and figure out what are all of the unit costs that break up an offering, as opposed to what are the unit benefits that an offering gives to us. And I think when we start to think about that, the industry will move forward. We'll be in a much better space. So final thing, and I'll share this around with everybody, a good kind of acronym to stomp out the fluff and, you know, get down to the bare bones in our space is an acronym called STOMP. We'll share this with you, but it basically stands for strategy. How much strategy do you own? What is the strategy? Who's governing it? Technology. Where is the technology sitting? Is it owned by you? Do you understand it? What's the cost of that ownership? Operations. What's the makeup of the team? How are they interacting with you? What's the workflow that you manage of that operation? Media. The difference between inventory sources, why they're valuable to you, you know, how to engage with them, and then finally price. How is that inventory priced, and how does that equate to value? So it's a kind of shorthanded way of thinking about it. And yeah, by all means, any questions or ideas on, you know, how to evaluate things better, let me have it. So thank you.